This is Van Electric Ghost, and we're live on the air on our Facebook, Twitch, and YouTube channels. We're here tonight with a competitive intelligence expert, Robbie Phoenixx. And thank you for being on the show. How are you doing tonight?
I am fantastic. Thank you for having me.
Now, we do want to mention we are a featured podcast on the Newsly channel, which is a podcast channel on Android and iOS. And so if you check out coupon code GHOST, you get 1 month premium subscription so you can stop scrolling, start listening. This episode will be on Newsly later tonight. And thank you again for being on the show.
It's all my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So what is a competitive intelligence expert? Maybe you can tell the audience, what does that actually mean?
Sure. And thank you for asking it. It's basically teaching companies how to win. So I have an illustrious background in being a top salesperson nationwide and also a top 10% ranked national engineer in a Fortune 100, happened to be Verizon, where I started my career. And if you can imagine that there's a lot of opportunity for synergy between sales, engineering, and ultimately marketing, competitive intelligence experts bring those worlds together for a beautiful symphony of winning against their competition. That's what we do.
That's a cool thing. I think a lot of creative people say, I'm a podcaster, I'm a musician, I'm a producer. I actually work as a day job as a software designer.
Oh,
So,
that's so cool.
being in electronic music, I kind of have my head in IT. I've got my Moogs and my synths all around me. But I got into podcasting back in 2016. And I just did it because I liked it. And now it's actually become more of a side gig where it's, podcasting's like the big thing. And so it's actually found a way for a lot of influencers, a lot of salespeople, a lot of other people are using it to get into markets. And, initially I just did it because I was approached by a radio DJ to talk about my music. And I liked it so much that I started actually interviewing bands. And that's how it
Wow.
started back in 2016. We were about 860 episodes, and we branched out to be more expansive than what we originally do. But we still interview musicians to beyond that, to life coaches, mentors, people like yourself. And people told us, oh, you shouldn't be so open. But we found, we've been doing it since 2016. So we was like, okay, we have a method to our madness.
Clearly, and it feels like sometimes Providence has a hand. And I'll just say it this way for all in your audience that may believe or may not. But I'll tell you what, I would go toe to toe any day and go on your show, because where my hood was in 23 years of my career was in the corporate hood. And sometimes they got it, right? Sometimes they understand that creative can, in fact, be your competitive advantage if you leverage it authentically. And
Mhm.
that's the secret in my success in coaching two Fortune 100 companies to $254 million of direct contribution was I wasn't just sitting at my desk waiting for opportunity. Number one, I took initiative. Number two, I learned from everyone around me super humbly. And number three, it's exactly people like yourself that get it. That it's not just an art and a science, it's both, and it's passion all in between. So thank you for having me again.
Well, I do see your guitars, and behind me I have my Moogs and my modular synths, so we're kind of in the same zone. So, like, you transitioned effectively from corporate Fortune 100 companies into the music industry, but from this competitive advantage type of mindset. And I think it's like a lot of musicians, we always forget about marketing. Cause I get into my Moog, I get in my Juno, I get into my modular synthesis, and I say, oh, I just want to make art. But then we have to figure out, like, you have to market. You can't just write all day. You have to find a way to present your work, or you're just gonna be in your lab all day.
Correct. And this is a good reminder from a good mentor of mine. He's the owner and head of Rock Rage Radio, incidentally. His name is John Coons. He's a very close friend of mine and someone in our family we hold high esteem. And he used to tell the artists I'd bring in under my brand, Sonic Octane, he'd say, hey, look, you could be the most talented artist today because you've got all that software right at your desktop. It's prosumer grade, awesome universal audio. You've got Moogs in your studio as an example as well, which is incredible. And the challenge part is, how are you going to market yourself? Like, what initiative do you take to get yourself out there and be a known entity in whatever realm it is that you're creating it? So I couldn't agree more. And I was very blessed to have a little bit more of a creative and business mindset coming into this, because man, if I listened to everything you see online, you would almost think I'd market myself on Spotify or YouTube and I'd be a rock star. But that's really not the way of the artist today, in my humble opinion. It's one
Mhm.
of a few approaches, but it's not really the secret in the sauce.
Yeah, it's interesting. It is 'cause I still what I found is like I'm a really good I'm a musician, I'm a producer, but I'm actually doing very well as a podcaster. And then I said, well, you know what? That's a way to get my brand out there because then people find out about my podcast and then they naturally go into my music and say, oh, he does music too. And then what
Yeah,
I run into is I get deals where I end up working with other artists. I produce other people's records. I end up playing on other people's records. I get opportunities to do stuff. And so those opportunities may not put me in the top 10 or top 20 or top 100, but I'm able to do things. And it's like
right,
maybe a different measurement because I'm doing different type of creative work. But you still get out there. And as long as you find a way to get, into what you love to do, and what I mean, I've been doing music since I was 17, and I did
wow,
it because I love it, not because I was trying to be the next big thing, but I just do it because I'm a musician, and I
right,
just like it. And then I
right,
found a way to get into podcasting. It's like I kind of feel like some people in podcasting, they only last like 12 episodes
right.
because then they're like, "Oh, well, it didn't catch fire." I'm at 861 episodes.
Oh my gosh, that's like an anthology of awesome, and so much you've learned along the way, and the people you meet. Like honestly, like it's so funny when I look back on the corporate side of my career and I go, how did I do all that? Like, I know there were some sleepless nights in there, believe me, dozens of them. And there are a lot of people that were in the top 10% ish that were absolutely of that cloth. Like they worked their tails off, and I have great respect for them to this day. Yet there was more to it. And number one, I think of are all the names of people that I've met along the way. And it's certainly in music, it's absolutely no different. It's not solely who you know, it's how you work with them to add value to them too, right? So that's a big learning, and I think a lot of artists they get trapped. You get trapped in, oh, I've got to market on Instagram, and I got to figure that out. Oh, I've got to go figure out title because they have a better royalty rate, and they have a little bit of artist tour support if I'm in the top of their pecking order. Or let me go to
Mhm.
YouTube and do a bunch of keyword ad buys because, well, that's where a lot of artists have broken, right? So I'm just going to follow in those footsteps, and you get trapped. You get trapped in literally months and months of trying to figure out how do I get my brand and my music out there on each of these platforms, and it's maddening. So I took it a little bit differently, and so I came from a business background, and I said, if I were to even try to place my stuff in any of those realms, my per spin rate is going to be very, very low. And I also own and operate separately a tour bus company. And my artists at the time, they wanted to hit the road. They wanted to go tour to New York and come back to Denver, where we're based out of. So I knew my multiple needed to be in the thousands, like several thousands, to do something like that. And ultimately, I found an independent filmmaker. And that independent filmmaker was willing, by God's grace, to take a baby brand of ours at the time. We were just off syndicated television in an interview out of New York, and she thought we were good enough, right? We weren't hot artists, we were good enough. And we were humble. And she put us on her mini series that had 5 episodes with a bunch of like absolutely talented actors and actresses. And ultimately, our brand got exposed as a title track in that mini series. She was even kind enough to put us on the front end of each episode and also on the back end. So two different
Oh,
derivative
yeah.
work of the same song. That
Mhm.
led to daytime Emmy submission. That was the first thing ever. And over 30 million song plays because of that relationship. And I didn't have to spend a dime on Spotify, which was awesome because, you spend a dime, you get back a fraction of a penny anyhow.
Yeah, yeah, you don't get anything.
So
Rare, it's like a lot winning the lottery. Like the chances of you putting a lot of money into it and actually getting anything out of it. I see an artist, oh, they're happy they got 30,000 plays. What, you got like 15 bucks?
yeah, right. If you're even looking to collect.
Yeah,
And I
you
know
gotta get
very
millions of play hundreds of millions of plays to make anything,
Robbie
and
Phoenixx always says this, and this is where my hallmark in keynote speaking is really shining right now. And I'm just in the process of booking my calendar for the remainder of 2023. So your audience knows they can hire me to not only keynote and kind of punt these concepts, but to drill down, because I've done it in corporations to the tune of $250 million to 2 Fortune 100s. And now I'm doing it kicking ass in the music industry. And here's the bottom line: leverage your creativity for your competitive advantage. And when I was sitting as an engineer years ago in Philadelphia, I was just a top salesperson nationwide 2 years earlier. I'm now sitting in Philly, and I'm looking at companies like AT&T in our own backyard kicking our tails. And I had to study them. I had to study their cost model. I had to study, how does one design a campaign using Terrace SQL data and USOC codes and billing and provisioning systems and all this stuff. And that was all creativity. That was tapping into something engineers never do. They never go into campaign design and request for proposal and regulatory compliance checklists and all these weird things that I was exposing myself into just to know how to improve the game, including my skill set. And ultimately that led to that particular team, and it happens to be on my LinkedIn profile, somewhere in my engineering tenure, you'll see it there. The team was at like 40+% of their goal by April that year when I was assigned to support that team. And all this custom campaign stuff led to over 150, 160% of their goal by end of year. It was just innovative stuff. It was going to the well, humbly asking the good Lord to say, show me a little more of the way and bring some good people around me to cross-train me and teach me about campaign concepts. So at Verizon, that happened to be Marilyn Curl at the time. And I had a lot of support from the field sales manager, Jim Bowers, and that led to that success. We campaigned in Pittsburgh, Newark, Philadelphia. We were piloting the whole concept of that. That led to even better things in that intelligence career, to over $100 million of direct contribution through competitive research and leveraging that nationwide. So I would always say, whether you're in a creative realm and you're looking for a way to innovate and get a little bit better of a multiple on your earnings, go to independent filmmakers. Think outside the box. Don't necessarily run to Spotify to give you the marketing solutions that may or may not work so well. And certainly in corporate environments that can train very similarly. Look at your campaign range of opportunities and look at the competition very carefully and research it well, because that can lead to amazing things.
Yeah, because the opportunities are really like in sync licensing. I've been looking at video games. We actually did license a bunch of our music for Twitch through BMI. And so there's like a lot of stuff where we can do, because that's where because if you go and instead of just going after the gamers and trying to slam them for using your stuff, I actually got with this company that actually licenses music for gamers so they can do it without getting in trouble.
Correct.
And so then I was able to get a higher rate than what Spotify does for the songs that I have licensed for that. And then the same thing goes with like getting this stuff licensed into video games. Or you can run soundtracks for video games like a film. You can score a video game like a film. You actually get video game producers to send you their game, and you're actually watching it and scoring it like you would do a film.
See, that's
the way they are.
That is fascinating. You see what I mean? You've just unlocked an ingredient for your audience that is absolutely amazing. Like, with all due respect, my genre, let's say, it's a little bit more behind the times. They're not typically executive MBA level educated. They're not typically coming from corporate environments. I've done the best that I can do, and I'm just one human being, obviously very humbly. Here's a great example where rock in my genre can learn from you, right? God's truth is Sonic Octane, my band's brand. We had a friend in Austin that put us in his video game, but God bless him, he just has no concept of what you just shared. Like, if he had known that as an app developer, he could go to BMI, find maybe Harry Fox agency that would license or sub-license this, and maybe there would be a range of opportunities that would come his way, whose multiple would be above what absolutely he would be earning on digital radio today, as an example, and going through Sound Exchange twice a year to get the few dollars at the bottom of the well, if you know what I mean. So credit to you. I think this is, again, why I feel there's providence in us coming together today, because I'm sure those folks in your audience that are either in a, let's say, a business domain that are looking to up their game and compete to win, whether they're in a creative environment and they're looking to leverage that creativity advantage to their win factor, it's all the same thread. It's just a different approach.
Yeah, there's a lot of parallels. I'm a software designer, but also like when you get into electronic music, I kind of look at it, and a lot of the heroes I looked at, like Kraftwerk or Yellow Magic Orchestra, there's something technical about like synthesizers, right? So
Right.
it's not they're not that like a guitar. Like we're actually building sound waves, taking sine waves and running them through subtractive synthesis or whatever. We get into like the theories of Buchla and Dr. Robert Moog, and we're like, wow, like are we musicians? Are we scientists? We're kind of merging science and art.
That's
And it's
key.
in itself, it's a different type of art that does lend itself to the like doing soundtracks or
Yeah,
doing game soundtracks or doing ad soundtracks, because that's kind of what you do. Because a lot of what we do is we can do hours and hours of music, or tiny bits of music like 30 seconds or 60 seconds or a minute, or just for a scene, and when you look at the fact that you could go to independent filmmakers, could go to guys coming out of Berkeley, coming out of these small film schools, the New York Film School, and they're looking for something and say, "Hey, I'll go and score it just to give you a try with a brand new director."
correct.
You just to get your name out there, because once you get your name, the way the game is, once somebody you score something, then you tend to get more work.
That's the funny thing. That's exactly right. And so Sonic Octane started as a brand concept in the fall of 2016 that I did some pre-work on, obviously, to bring that in. We did independent filming with the University of Colorado Film School third-year students that were graduating in the spring. They loved the idea of renting a raceway, and Sonic Octane having speed and Americana and engineering obviously is part of the mix. That
Mm,
led to other good things. And then when we met up with this independent film producer 2 years later, mind you, after all that pre-work had been done, that led to the opportunity for her to agree to allow us to be a part of her miniseries that led to 30 million song plays, incidentally. That led to a filming opportunity. Now, this is a cool thing that you may not always hear about Sonic Octane or Robbie Phoenixx, the brand that led some of this effort as part of a team. We filmed on top of Mandalay Bay after the unfortunate massacre that happened there, the
oh
Harvest
yeah.
Music Festival massacre. Now, this is the top of Mandalay Bay at the exclusive VIP only, member only foundation room. So it was all this unbelievably beautiful, ornate architecture, history, the members that are part of that experience, like J Lo, all the top
Mhm.
artists you could imagine that come through Las Vegas, and in particular those that are retained by Live Nation. My little band that spent 4 months planning. By the way, I still have one of the planning memorandums here from months before we ever got into the door of the place with a 5:30 a.m. casting call. We're given the opportunity to partner with Live Nation to film there. And so what I would say is we've released one song, and we're soon later this year to release several songs. One of those songs we released through Sony the Origin.
Oh, you froze a little bit. What happened there? Your computer froze. I don't know what happened.
So I'll see if
Oh,
I
there you're
can
back.
restate this back a
You're
little.
back. You're
So
back.
our little humble band that could, Sonic Octane, was selected by Live Nation to film at the exclusive Foundation Room in Las Vegas. So with that, we have released one audio so far in partnership with Curtain Call Records and Rock Rage Radio that was released through a major, through Sony the Orchard. And it's called a song title called The Reckoning. And at the end of the day, we filmed to kind of celebrate the right questions we should be asking in America, which is what are the underlying causes or underpinnings of violence in
Mm,
America? And we're not saying, we're not putting a color on it. We're not
mm.
putting a geography on it. We're not putting our politics on it. We're artists. We're just asking the questions. And again, Live Nations selected us to be the messenger of that. And we're really proud of that particular work. And that led to even better things in our future ahead.
So the reckoning. So that's coming out,
Yeah,
or that.
it's available today on digital release through Sony the Orchard, or you can
Okay.
find it on Facebook or Spotify today.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
So that's awesome. How long did that take to put that together?
Well, interestingly enough, so you kind of see some studio infrastructure behind
Yeah,
me.
yeah,
All the
yeah.
music itself was cut here. So I did all the drum, all the bass, all the guitar work. I had another colleague help me with some of the keyboard, which was kind of a plug-in inside of our DAW with some
Mhm.
drop insert type loops. And then ultimately we had a separate level or workflow that cleaned up our demo audio here in the studio. And that was through Curtain Call Records. And that ultimately was released through Sony The Orchard. So that's generally the overview of the workflow.
That's cool. Like, so you have your home studio, you have like your bedroom producer studio, and then you're able to put it into your DAW and get it out there. But you're yeah, so you got your plugins. I see you got the real guitars. You got yeah. I'm primarily a keyboardist, but I see a lot of your gear. Yeah, and I see your all your racks and your plugins and your yeah. You got some Neve stuff there.
Yeah,
You got
we've
your
got Neve, we've got some stuff from well, this is British, Russian,
oh,
American, just from all over the place. We've got tour gear for stadiums, and I'll say
awesome.
that it's a full pre-production rehearsal facility. So behind me here, you can see a obviously full drum set,
Yeah,
full
yeah,
you
yeah.
know.
You got the whole thing there. You got what the dream well, yeah, the dream, yeah, I'm a synthesis, so I just have tons of boards, but, I do have a couple Russian preamps and things I got into, but, yeah, it's like I'm kind of a hybrid guy. I kinda got out of, DAWs, and I do everything with multi-tracks. So
Wow,
I do a lot of stuff in directly into multi-tracks because I like to capture my Moogs and my modular stuff directly, and then
wow.
I might treat them with like some of my Russian preamps, my analog preamp stuff. But
Woo.
yeah, it's just a point. I kind of like I grew up with like Funkadelic and bands like Yes
Yes. Oh
and
my
and,
gosh,
and
dude, you're
Peter
killing.
Peter Gabriel Genesis. So my
Oh,
songs are like
oh.
6, 7, 8 minutes long. So I
Dude,
mean,
believe it or not, when you go to our Twitter, and I know you'll be sharing this after the podcast, our Twitter's at Sonic Band Fan. And as you go out there, you'll
mhm.
see that the band Yes follows my band, man. It's like,
Oh, that's
and when you,
cool.
dude,
Yeah, I love
it's
Yes. Rick
unbelievable.
Wakeman's like he's one of the guys, between like Emerson, Lake and Palmer, Rick Wakeman. I'm always followed, I follow a lot of jazz, man. I listen to Sun Ra, I listen to Davis, I listen to Coltrane.
Real
And
deal.
then
No wonder you're a producer. That makes perfect sense.
well,
It does.
I like I've been playing since I was 17. I started on like Tascams and Fostex. And
Yeah,
then when the DAWs came, I still like the Tascam Fostex stuff. So I still stayed with like Tascam and Zoom, and I just decided to stay with like hardware recorders. I did
yeah.
move to like my one modern thing I have is like an Akai Force,
Nice.
but I still link it to a hardware like multi-track.
It
So I'll
needs a
go and
solution behind it. Exactly.
yeah, and then I would link a like a Moog grandmother through CV into
Yeah.
it and use the real Moog instead of the plugin. I actually
Right.
go CV my own plugin
Dude, you
to
gotta
have my
write.
Moog come in.
I'm officially popping the cork. We should absolutely collaborate because you see, I've got a wall of boutique, like they're truly one of a kind. I didn't get into all the detail of like this
Yeah,
amp, for
yeah,
instance.
got some cool stuff there, yeah.
Oh yeah.
I can see it.
So they're on
Yeah,
class A and limited run and all that kind of stuff. But I would
yeah,
love to
you got the cool
collaborate
stuff.
with that.
Yeah, I'm a very experimental. I mean, I'm kinda like I've been listening to like, like Spaces the Place and Jazz and Silhouette. Like Sun Ra, I've been really vibing on Sun Ra lately, and then Weather Report because, Wayne Shorter. I've been going back and listening to Weather Report a lot.
Weather Report, Jaco Pastorius. Are you kidding me?
Yeah, Jacko is
Dude,
just fantastic. Oh my
I mean,
god.
I was a former bassist, so going back a little bit on Robbie Phoenix's history, and I'm probably going back a little too far. I hope not for your audience, but I started as a bass player, and I literally picked up. Well, I started with the basics, Rolling Stones, early
Mhm,
Who stuff. Then I
mhm,
put it into high gear, and I started playing like Bob Daisley from Ozzy Osbourne, because the
mhm,
first two albums from Ozzy were like poetry, the way he would play like "Goodbye to Romance," for example. Then I
mhm.
got heavy into Led Zeppelin, so John Paul Jones, aka John Baldwin.
Yeah, Jones, he's awesome. I like his keyboard work too.
Oh
Like,
my
if you
god,
listen to a lot of Zeppelin stuff, he's an underrated keyboardist. Just like Townsend is an underrated keyboardist for the stuff he did with the ARP 2500 and the
of
2600
course.
on
Yeah, no,
Who Are You? He's the
no
envelope
kidding.
follower and stuff like that.
Listen
Like,
to
he
that.
was yeah, totally. Baba O'Reilly. I mean, to
Right.
me he's in the keyboard magazines all the time. Like a lot of people don't realize, like synthesists actually respect Pete a lot for what he used to do when you listen to like "Who Are You" or "Relay" or
Correct.
any of those songs. What he did with the R2500 and the 2600 running through the envelope follower. He would take his
Well,
guitar and then run it through the envelope follower and do this really interesting manipulation of his
and
guitar through the ARP.
and
But
what you just said there catches my ear a little bit, and I have to ask you this because I'm actually dying to know this. I hope your audience is. Now I know about envelope filters as a basis, right? Because Stanley
mhm,
Clarke used them and Chris Squire to some extent. But tell me, like Tempest Fugit sounds to me more like an envelope filter than a flanger. But you
mhm.
said follower. Is that something to do with time?
Yeah, the envelope follower is a unique circuit within the ARP 2500 2600 synthesizer. And it's like it is not, you don't really see it on Moogs. I mean, some of the big modular Moogs might have had it, but it was a unique design element of the ARP 2600. And Pete kind of got into it where he found that when he plugged his guitar into it, he treated it like a pedal. So he
Yeah.
treated that whole synth workflow as a pedal. And the
Oh,
envelope follower allowed him to actually bring his guitar as the input instead of a keyboard. And then it actually creates like up and down modulation. If you take like a square wave, it'll create a modulation point on the envelope follower. So it follows like the signal coming in. And
yeah,
then it creates like what you hear on a song like Relay or Who Are You?
yeah.
And you think that's all synth, but it's actually him taking the guitar and running it through that, and then
Oh
creating
my
that kind of
God.
modulation point, which he was very unique. And then you have Eddie Van Halen with the Oberheim. The way
Right.
he did the chords is more like an approach of a guitar player playing chords, and that's why Jump sounds the way it does. Because I always found it when a guitar player hits a synth, they come in with a different mindset and they
Right.
approach it in a different ways. Like Pete's modulations on Who songs are not what Keith Emerson or Rick Wakeman would do. They
Right.
wouldn't even think like that.
No,
They
no,
don't
no.
even think that way. And so always thought it's really interesting when you see a guy like Eddie and Pete approach the synth. They came at it in a different way, and you get a totally different world.
I think my head is almost blown off. Like literally, you're super impressive. Now I'm not even just gonna ask. I'm gonna demand, as if I'm gonna demand on your show. But I am so impressed. Genuinely, I would be honored to work with you this year at some point when you feel it's appropriate. Just to, I mean, I attack guitar. Like I'm a bassist, so when I play
Mhm.
guitar, it's like Dave Grohl. It's like it becomes splinters by the time
Yeah,
I'm done
heavy.
and bleeding. But
Yeah,
at
I
the end
like
of the
that.
day, oh, believe me when I tell you, I bring it, and I've got a whole bunch of new music that I'm starting to work on, and I'll just send you some riffs. Maybe you can make something much better of it. Anyhow, that's how I
Yeah,
see
it's always cool to run something into a Moog. Like I have a real spring reverb inside my Moog grandmother. It's a
it.
physical string reverb, and if you run a guitar into it, you can affect it, and then I like what is called playing the controls, right? So a lot of what I do is I'll put the tape on, and I'll run a signal through my Moog, and actually, as part of the performance, use the control surface of the Moog from left to right, using it to like overdrive the CP3 mixer or play with the envelope generator and to get it to be really plucky, get it to be more sustained, and then you actually use it as a performance aspect like a jazz guy, like a
That's
fusion player. And if
that's
you do
unbelievable.
that, you can get very unique kind of point in time sound painting type of experiments, and that's what I'm about. That's why I call my stuff expansive sound experiments, because I spent a lot of time with my analog and modular synths trying to do things that are very point in time, and then I put them down on multi-tracks, and then I can reuse them and I can loop them. But I
Yeah.
like to create original kind of sound painting, Pink Floyd kind of old school, yes, Genesis type of. That's where
Oh
my
my
head's at.
gosh,
That's what I do.
dude, that's what I grew up on, bro. Like I literally, I'm not kidding you. Like Pink Floyd, The Wall, Shine on You, Crazy Diamond, War Pigs. Just
Yeah,
I could go on and on with
all that
songs
stuff.
to me. Oh my, oh, live at Pompeii. I mean, Jesus, listen to
Yeah,
that organ. It's
I
not
love
just a
animals.
Leslie.
I listen to yeah, animals and
Animals.
Wish You Were Here. I love all Pink Floyd stuff because they're so expansive. The stuff they used to do with the EMC3C3, the EMS3C3 was what the synth that they used primarily. It's very unique to their sound. You can hear it on Dark Side, the EMS VC3, but it's
Right.
a very interesting extent they had like a peg kind of battleship modulation point instead of controlled voltage. So it was big modulation matrix that you could put pegs in to complete the circuit rather than CV wires. And
Get
it
out.
has a different sound of everything. It doesn't sound like anything else.
You
Like
see,
that's why they sound kind of unique.
this reminds me a little bit as a guitarist. I've read interviews of Eddie Van Halen, and I had a privilege to meet Eddie Van Halen at the Smithsonian in
Oh
DC
wow.
a
I
number of
love
years
Eddie.
ago. And I met Slash and a bunch of these cats because they're all my role models. Like I love these
Mhm.
guys through and through for what they did for music and just the leadership within the realm of guitar and songwriting. So I remember one of the interview articles I read of Eddie before having met him because I was trying to do my homework to show him that I cared. And
Mhm.
it was all about voltage, bro. It's all about playing with the voltage plates and
Yeah.
variacs in front of his Marshall. You know what I mean? So it's I
Yeah,
love
well, yeah, you can do a lot. I mean, the Edge does a lot. Like he actually treats his guitar kind of like a synthesis, like a modular synthesis. Like, if you ever seen the movie, like does very simple patterns on his guitar, but he runs them through this big stack of modulation points, kind of like a modular synthesis.
yep.
And sometimes, like the original notes are very simple, but
Yeah.
what you end up doing with your synthesis type of mindset is that you can multiply or invert or change. A lot of what we do is like I use like attenuverters. Like on
Uh-huh.
modes, attenuverters can go positive and negative. So they can
That's
like warp stuff. And I've got all kinds of things that like to warp things. I use like a modular sampler that actually modulates points in time and actually it takes like points of the song and mixes them together. So
I
it can
actually
take like the beginning, put it into the middle to the end, all simultaneously.
like almost like a tape delay, old style, like Jimmy
It's like
Page.
a warping thing. It's a warper, and it warps things so it becomes unrecognizable. But I like to actually go into sample a Moog and then warp
Ooh,
it
you're such a
rather than
mastermind.
sample in somebody else's
Oh my
song. I'll
God.
sample
You
a synth and then
totally
warp
you were blowing my mind. And I thought I had something to offer. No, like, dude, we gotta definitely collaborate. And I'll tell you what, there's a sound I'll flip to you later just for fun. It's from the Edge. It's
Mhm.
off of Pop CD. There's a certain guitar sound I've been dying to understand how he did it.
Oh, what he did? Yeah, he's
Yeah.
very interesting. Like, he has some very when you actually deconstruct it, a lot of the stuff is very simple playing patterns.
Hmm.
They're
Yeah.
not complicated at all.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
what he's able to do with all the layers of reverbs and delays and all. He does a lot of things beyond delays and reverbs. He does things that are really deconstructing the sound and kind of flipping it like a filter.
Yeah.
Flipping it like an envelope follower. He seems to do a lot of that.
Hmm.
But yeah, he's very. I was always very interested in what he did with Brian Eno
Oh,
on Unforgettable Fire.
right. Unforgettable Fire. Exactly.
Yeah, because some people like I did some stuff that this label they had. I think Eno was the consultant on it, and they liked some of the stuff I was doing because it was reminding them of Eno experiments. Because I'm like my head jam. I love the stuff that Eno did with Dylan.
Oh,
Um,
big time.
and I like his kind of he does these kind of sound washes where things
Yeah.
kind of get washed out, but then there's like a lot of like I don't know, there's different harmonics in it, and it's like the multiple schools of thought and synthesis. There's like the Buchla school that's like basically when you're thinking about additive synthesis based on sine waves, and
Yep.
then you have the subtractive synthesis that Dr. Robert Moog came up with. Which most synthesizer guys use subtractive.
Right.
Right, that's what like from the Jupiter 8 to the Oberheim to all the Roland Junos, that's all subtractive.
Yep.
But when you get to Buchla stuff, then it starts getting into like very interesting harmonics all coming off of sine waves.
See, you're
And the
reminding
sine
me of
waves create
it's
totally
so
different weird sounds for you. You can use in soundtracks and stuff, but it's not normally used for pop. It's like a treatment on top of a pop song or
dude,
something in like a Terminator soundtrack.
I'm actually starting to work with a couple of amazing people. I was invited to their homes several years ago volunteering for homeless. Like I would volunteer because of a gentleman named Bob Golden, who him
Mm,
and his wife were kind enough to tune me in to the needs of some of the community in Las Vegas. So I was driving between LA and the Denver area where I live. And they would pull me into these volunteer things. And so sure enough, there was a house party one evening And again, they're just being kind to connect me to people in the city. And so several years later now, 7+ years later, I actually have the opportunity to work with this husband-wife songwriting team. They're multi-Grammy award winning.
Oh,
They have
wow.
their own brand that is killing it, man. They're really good. And so I think this will be a very creative year overall. And I'll be excited to work with you. When you were sharing earlier about the synthesis and subtraction, I was thinking about the Digitech whammy pedal. I'm sure you're familiar with that.
Yeah,
And
yeah, yeah.
about U2's song Discotheque, because the guitar
Oh,
in that
yeah, yeah,
song, you get
yeah.
the ping delay. It's also got all this other just harmonics in the second and third and fourth repetitions that are very unique.
Yeah, the Edge is just so interesting because he kind of like he kind of taught himself. And it's one of these kind of things like Hendrix taught himself. And it's like when you find a guy that actually kind of like Pete didn't really know sense, he just went and got a bunch of modulars.
Right,
He went and got like the ARP
right,
2500 and 2600. 2500 is like a big modular.
right.
And he just started playing with it. And that's what happened when I got mine. I just actually just got it, and I had just been playing like piano and regular board stuff, and then I got into synths, and I was like, wow. Actually, when you have the permission to actually play with it like a scientist, then you're like, well, why does the square wave sound like this, and why does the sine wave sound like that? Then you
Right.
start to realize what you can do. And then, I spend so much time on sound design before I even write a song,
Wow.
because
Right.
I like to build the way my tones. I build
Right.
all my tones from scratch without doing plugins. I build my bass drums and my
Oh,
all my drums off a Moog
and
drum
it's an
machine.
analog, brother. That's like
Yeah,
the
why
best sound ever.
I
Like,
use a
dude,
Moog drum machine, which actually they have a thing called a DFAM, drummer from another mother, and it
whoa,
actually allows you to build from square and triangle waves your own drums.
gosh.
And then it's kind of like an 808, but it's actually, I mean, it's a Moog, they're Moog oscillators. You got two Moog oscillators that allowed you to build. Now it's very limited. It only has 8 steps, no MIDI. It's all
Yep.
CV.
Yep.
But what I do is I'll go and put something down and put it into a sampler. So I'll put
Oh,
like
man.
L4 on the floor, and then I'll go and then do another beat over it and do the hi-hats, but they're custom hi-hats I built, and you can just build everything with it and then start tracking it. So if you have a multi-track, you just start tracking the drums, track 2 and 4, 2 and 1 and 2, and then 3 and 4, and you just keep on tracking it.
Well, you know
And
what?
then you end up having original beats that you don't end up getting copyright violations because you went and created it yourself.
Of course, definitely true. And in the digital realm, I find myself having to do that, obviously. So, in the benefit of a studio, this is a demo studio. Obviously, it's not a commercial grade facility, certainly. However, I know that loops are loops, and I know that drum patterns are somewhat unique. You may want to add accents or flams. But
Mhm.
let's get back to the thing you said earlier. Like, I recall seeing a documentary, I believe it was on Netflix, about the 808.
Oh,
And
yeah.
if I'm not mistaken, was this also the same device that our beloved, dearly departed Prince, the artist
Oh,
formerly known as, used in Purple Rain for When Doves Cry and Purple
well, I
Rain?
think he was using the Lin LM1,
Mm,
which the Lin LM1, but he did use 808s. There are some songs he did 808s, and he used like D50 Roland since like on
mhm,
Love Sexy. But yeah, the Lin like LM1 and LM2s, he was really into those.
mm,
And it was really interesting because he wouldn't, use a bass line on When Doves Cry. There
right.
actually is a version of it that has the bass. And
Whoa,
Prince actually Warner Brothers didn't want it without the bass, but he kind of pushed and says it actually sounds better without the bass. And
right.
Prince, has so many variations, I'm told Prince had, where he
Yes,
would do so many different versions of a song like Hendrix. And he has so many different versions. Most of them go out like 12 minutes.
right,
They go out
right,
really long, and then they get cut down. And then the thing about that When Doves Cry, the one with the bass line, it's too busy. And when you actually pull the bass line out of it, then you actually hear the core of what it is. It's like, wow,
right.
a
That's
lot of his songs are like that. There's stuff from Sign of the Times that had layers in it, and when he actually released it, those layers were pulled out. And what he
wow.
found was a lot of his style was like pulling things out was actually the thing that did it. For most of his great songs is when he pulled out the layers. and
Right.
left it more like a demo,
Well, it's
it would
interesting.
end up going through better.
And going through better, it's like, again, back to that concept of orchestra I was mentioning earlier, a little bit of alluding to in corporate environments. I mean, you've got layers and layers of functions, teams, people. And I'll tell you what, man, intelligence functions live and breathe based on these dynamics directly in business. And I think people don't always see that. Like
Mm,
leaders, some are a little more creative and visionary, let's say, and some are very, like, let's say Wharton. They're very, and not to pick on Wharton as it, but just as an example, they're like, I have an executive MBA. I know how people think in those circles. And I have that education over 2 years of being in class to know that companies like big pharma, financial services, I could go on and on, but even the dozens and dozens of senior executives I have directly served and supported humbly, they don't always have the mindset. They don't always have the experience even to go, like what you're doing in music is very similar in alchemy to what I did in corporate environments. So if you've got a campaign concept, you got to validate it. You can't just say, hey, this is cool. These are some circuit IDs and provisioning codes that will sell or upsell. You got to go external and research it and know if it's going to fly, because Comcast is there, AT&T, fill in the blank,
mhm.
Microsoft, Google, and you've got to know how they play their game, and you
Yeah.
got to know it really well. So I appreciate what you're saying. This is so cool that you're in
Yeah.
that
There's
universe.
a lot of synergy between what you're saying because, like, I do software development and we do like, whether we're going to do it with agile or waterfall, we end up dealing with a lot of, like in my line of business, I deal with a lot of insurance companies and banks. They're stuck in, on VCM and DB2 COBOL systems. Right.
Wow.
And we move them to maybe Oracle systems, and we try to get them into, AWS, and we try to get them to blockchain. But a lot of times they're still living on DB2 with maybe a Java front end. That's
Yep.
what that's their capability. And
Yep.
so we try to deal with that, there's a lot of art and science to it because some of those old school systems kids don't even know COBOL, so they
Right.
have
Right.
no idea what to do. And I'm a child of the '70s, so I kind of grew up with COBOL. But yeah, there's a lot of art to it. What I find is like in what you can do and what you in the limitations of the memory back then, and in the kind of elegance of the code. And then
Correct.
being an artist and then looking at some of the elegant code from the '70s and the '80s, you're like, wow, the way they had to deal with it with when they don't have all this RAM and they don't have all this space, they were very elegant, and so it's like you can actually learn from that.
Right.
I always
Right.
try to tell some of the people, like, some of that, like, when you're forced with limitations, then you have to get more creative, and then when you have a wide open, like, where you can just write all the code you want,
Right.
then you can get sloppy.
Well, this is the weird thing. Like, I mean, I know you've probably seen the memes like I have on social media, like Facebook. You know, they brought men to the freaking moon with a computer that it was less than the power of our cell phones, surely.
Yeah, the code was elegant. Yeah, the
And
code
it
was
was,
elegant. If you think about it, yeah, it's, like, really awesome in
and the
terms of what they were able.
trigonometry and the calculus and the
Yeah.
geometry that was required to come up with those formulae, right? And then they had to
Mm,
put it in code and validate and test and deploy and then test again and refine. So it's very interesting to me because I know even in campaign design, like when I started in telecom, and gosh, this is going back a ways, but I recognized that it was a certain elegance to the old school architecture and code because, hey, you can merge with as many companies as you want, and the wrapper up here in the, let's say, the layer 7 OSI model stack where
mm,
the applications
yeah.
play, let's say, but there's also a lot of commonalities in layers 4 through 6. And the key there is learning the relational structure and learning how to make them all handshake in a way that's productive, right?
Mhm.
So
Yeah,
building custom servers, or if you're going to go in and have to stitch together what was already there in a data mart,
yeah.
you just got to get really elegant about how you stitch that together like a little quilt, you
Yeah,
know?
we end up doing a lot of data warehouses where the source is still coming DB2 VCM, right?
Right?
And then it might go to a data lake, and then maybe it go into blockchain or, on the very top. But the bottom a lot of times is DB2, vSphere, maybe Oracle, maybe server, but a lot of this stuff in the insurance industry is stuck in COBOL.
Oof.
And people will be surprised. There are a lot of big name companies, I won't go on embarrassed, but they're still using
Yeah.
even after Y2K, they're still using COBOL.
It's funny you share about that. Last year, I only was tangentially connected to this particular project in a private company. So I can only share so much, but I will say that I remember distinctly the question around what about financial services versus insurance industry in adopting quantum? Because clearly financial services went out of their way to try to be the early adopter. What learnings or parables can we learn from the pluses and minuses of that as we look into the insurance industry and the way in which they design their architecture and how we should be resourcing and deploying? And there's a lot of learning in that.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of insurance companies trying to jump, but they're still in 1968, 70 type technology. Most of them are still
Correct.
heavily involved with large blocks that are business and that. And maybe for the smartphones, they're using something that might be blockchain or AWS, but the
Sure.
core data
Sure.
is still living in the
Old
70s or
school.
the late 60s.
Welcome to school, right?
Yeah, that's the way it is. But then my Mogs are kind of they're from the late 60s or late 50s.
They're awesome. Well, when
You
I
know?
started in sales, the CRM that they had was based in IBM SNA mainframe, and
Yeah.
I just remember thinking, like, yes, it's kind of old school, but boy, was it fast! Like any query you put in came back
Yeah,
like near
yeah. Old
immediately.
mainframes are fast. I mean, maybe today their things are faster, but I grew up, working with these things, working with these old, VSAM files, but we had to know SQL. Even today, the skill set of being more technical to actually run my own queries. I can get dangerous with my queries, store procedure level stuff. But it's it's kind of cool to be in that world because it's like I like having, I like to take things apart. I'm the kind of kid
Yes,
that was making video games on a Texas Instrument computer with sprite graphics back in the day,
that's
78,
so cool.
79. That's what I was doing. And so it's unsurprising that I got to where I am because that's where my head was at. I mean, I'm a sociology government major that
Wow,
liked to do computers. I took no comp sci at all, but
wow.
I've been in the computer industry within IT, within, financial services and insurance since 1993.
So time out. We got to ask this humble question because I think you and I have a lot in common in this point in particular. So you did not choose to take a formal education in your passion, true or false?
Well, yeah, I mean, I have a liberal arts degree, but not for what I do.
Yeah, yeah,
I became what you call a business system analyst. So I'm kind of the in between, but I'm technical enough that I can get into SQL and I can get into Python and I can get all kinds of stuff, right?
yep,
But the fact is, I was curious, and what I think I took is the Socratic method.
yep.
I went to Bowdoin, right? So the idea of having this kind of holistic mindset that you
Mhm.
always learn, right? That
Yes,
I can write research papers, I can go and look up stuff, I can make an argument that I
that's
could.
awesome.
We had blue book tests. We didn't have tests where you're doing uh, 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 just a choice. You're
Yep.
not just filling out like a grid like an SAT. The professor wanted you to see if you understood what they had been teaching. You had a
Oh,
blue book exam,
no.
and if you passed the blue book, then you passed the course. And that's the way, the kind of Socratic method to show that you could think on your feet
Right,
and show that you can actually not just repeat the ideas, but actually make them your own.
right.
And that's what I kind of do in my industry. I help design things. As an analyst, I get the requirement from the owner, and
Sure,
then I go figure out what it should be in a kind of a pseudo code, regardless of whatever computer language it should be.
sure.
Figure out the logic, figure out what it should look like, and then we design it. And then the
It's
programmers actually build it, but I actually kind of make them honest and say, does it actually match the use case? Does
right.
it match the user story? Does it
My s
match the BRD? That's what I do.
the business requirements development, right? And the
Yeah.
is doesn't even fit in the SDLC cadence, let's say, because there's not always discipline with that in companies, as I've learned over time.
Oh yeah, they're not very I mean, people want to say they're agile, and
Right,
half the time they're still waterfall.
right,
And so they'll
right,
have a scrum session and they'll have black belts in there, but they still can't get it to a user story because it's too many actuaries in the room and they've got like 100 pages of formulas and
right.
they don't fit on
They don't
cards.
fit.
So,
Right. And
so
Amazon
I end
cracked
up
that code, though.
yeah,
Have you
go ahead.
ever seen the linear equation of Amazon's shopping experience online?
Yeah, I think I've seen it a couple times.
And your guests on the podcast can literally Google this. It's a Harvard Business Review case study from, I don't know, circa 2007, maybe. And like, dude, the thing is pages long. And if you take the time for a linear equation student that I was, I mean, my eyes were obviously popping out of my head. But at the end of the day, you realize the power of this, right? It's
Yeah,
not
dude.
just line queuing theory and who gets in the shopping cart first and is tax applied in a correct way or something. There's a whole series of logistics support behind what they do that is
Mhm.
part of the genius of their business in general, right? And
Yeah,
so,
I mean, it's hard to put that just in a context diagram with a bunch of use cases or user stories and have this big epic. And some things that are simple can be
right,
put into that format.
right,
But I deal with 100-page product specs, you
right,
know, 50-page product specs that with all these algorithms that, go on for pages
right,
because death tables within insurance. If you think
right,
about the factors and how we figure out how to price things and how those factors work against taxation,
and
against the
probability,
NASD, against the SEC, and
right,
then using this and that. So you're doing all kinds of
cross,
formulas just to keep something from becoming a modified endowment, just to
right,
keep something becoming taxable. Then you have to cost of insurance, and then you have to do like rate tables against all kinds of factors based
yeah,
on your health factors and run algorithms based on how do we price this based on all these medical facts, all
right.
these social media facts. And then
Wow,
actuaries come up with all these kind of ways to figure out and predict how long you're going to live
right, right.
based on your
Wow,
behavior. And it's
yeah,
based on your social behavior, your
sure.
medical record, your financial record. And then they run formulas to try to figure out, like, well, how long are you going to make it based on all this data?
Well, I hope they have it figured out for all of us, right? Because at the end of the day, I'd like to know roughly how long I'm planning to live, or at
Well,
least
they kind of predict it.
well, it sounds like
They're
a
trying to make
massive
a profit.
multivariate.
Trying to make a profit.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it sounds like a massive multivariate analysis where they're, trying to go with the best probabilities is what it sounds like to me. But it's very fascinating, and certainly
Yeah.
back to the corporate stuff of competing to win, and me being the win factor keynote. Like literally, if there are areas that businesses are ailing and they're looking for insight towards their solutions, or just practically speaking, if they're looking to stack up against their competition, and I know for a fact, financial services, insurance industry, big tech, where I sat for 23 years, every one of these leaders are scratching their heads wondering what is their win factor? How are they going to not only differentiate, but capitalize to win? Seeing their top lines accretively grow over time, taking process improvements towards EBITDA, favorable EBITDA positions and OPEX synergies. I'm your guy. And by all means, it's been a pleasure with you today. That's been awesome having the opportunity to meet you and to know how your mind is wired. It's fascinating. It really is.
Well, I want people for our audio audience to know that we have a link here. They've had up through the whole show. There's a www.linkedin.com/in/Robert ZS on the ZEAS. And you want to go and click on that when we're fully published. And that will be your LinkedIn profile where you could, once you're in there, people will be able to direct message you and contact you about your services.
Absolutely. I'd love the keynote. If you guys have executive retreats that you're looking for, an authoritative, proven Fortune 100 business leader that specializes in strategic marketing and competitive intel, please reach out. I'm booking now my calendar through 2023. And if you'd like a side note, I've got a band. So if you're looking for some music, I have a feeling our podcast host is going to be dossing in because I'd love to hear you play.
Yeah, yeah, that's always cool. I mean, I think it's like, music and culture is interesting because I started to try to weave this whole thing when I first started to branch out from interviewing musicians.
Yeah.
where I started, well, people say, well, how are you going to go from interviewing bands to interviewing influencers and life coaches and mentors? And I said, well, you know what? The Beatles were probably the biggest influencers ever.
Ever.
And so you can weave the idea that they made all musicians and actors and all kinds of people want to get into creativity, right?
Correct.
So the idea that you can't weave a story with music and connect it to other things, I said, well, I think that's false because I that's what I've been doing.
Right. You've been doing it as a leader. That's what's fascinating to me is that the parallels that you and I are, I'm surprised we didn't grow up from the same mom in a way, right? Because you're so cool and pleasant to interact with, and I get similar feedback. And it's not just that you're creative; it's that you're a level above the creative, and you're applied in business, and you're successful. And it's who you are. It's the very authentic you. And that's what I love about you, man. I'm really, really grateful to have met you. I hope that your audience will resonate with this message today. I am very much looking forward to updating you with successes along the way.
I think that's great. I think what you offer to people is kind of like the holistic vision. Because I think having that creative mindset allows you to get to that. I believe that people who are creative, and I would hope business would start to measure, and it's hard to measure creative. And this is my challenge to business is that when you have somebody that's a creative, and you're trying to measure them on the scale and put them on that bell curve, sometimes you may have to really think about because sometimes they drive away creatives
Right.
because they're trying to put them in the box.
Correct.
And then businesses are looking at creativity and they force them out. And so it's like for business people that maybe listen to this is to think that, some of the creative people who are doing this out of the box stuff are hard to measure in the bell curve. So if you
They
really
are.
want to, you need to think about other ways to capture creativity that you need in your business. And I believe you're bringing that to the table and you'll hire these people as outside consultants, but I think they need to have employees like that too.
Right.
So
And that's the key. Like, and I can say that from a position of true authority, having lived it. Like $254 million didn't just show up because some number of executives over 15 years of my senior advisory experience were on my A team. It was a combination of creativity, tenacity, innovation, and just having the right good people around me to support the vision of what it was that creatively led to competitive advantage. So at the end of the day, 100% I agree with you. I think there's a lot of opportunity with companies whose employees are probably like myself once upon a time, that were sitting in quiet offices at night, or in some cases working remote, sitting in their home offices. And they have all these ideas, and they may not always have the leadership around them to make them feel accepted and supported, or may not
mhm.
have the inner strength to stand up on their own feet and say, hey, I've got an idea I'd like to task with an intern program. Or, hey, I've got an innovative, beautiful soup module that I'm running in SQL because I want to mine records uniquely. Or, hey, I have a campaign design that will kick our top competitors' ass, literally. And I'm
Mhm.
the guy that will come in and liberate all of that creative energy inside of a company and help them win. And I promise you that.
Well, I think that's what people need. They need to give people that kind of shot. And I'm glad that we're kind of speaking this. So I hope people who listen to that take it to heart and actually kind of look at how they're running their business and maybe start to open their eyes because they probably have people around them, people in their business that could give them what they need and they don't even know that they're there.
Yeah.
And
Why
so I
go
think that's
external?
cool
Yeah.
that you're speaking to that.
I mean, believe me when I tell you, I've been through as an intelligence lead that I was in two Fortune 200s or Fortune 100s, excuse me. And you get people that have these big, hefty budgets to go to like analyst firms or they go to third party think tanks. And I won't mention names, but at the end of the day, we all know who they are. And they're
Yeah.
spending millions of dollars a year for what? You've got people on your staff that will innovate for you, and they'll be a fraction of that cost. And you could run 20 of them at the same time for the same budget. And if just one of them, a top 5%er, hits a win,
Works. Yeah.
you know. So you want to
Yeah,
be
it's a
Steve
no-brainer,
Jobs.
but it's like, yeah, you gotta trust your people. Like believe in your people and then they will believe in you And then when you build
Yes.
that trust relationship, then the creativity will start to be, apparent because it's there. And like every human
Absolutely.
being, in my experience, is creative, and you just got to give them the right trigger to let it kind of bloom. And then if you give
Correct.
it the right trigger, then you can get to the right place. And hiring somebody like you yourself is like is a good start for an organization to realize, they can have really awesome benefits if they trust and they take the guidance from somebody like what we're talking about for the last hour.
That's it. And my mantra inside of my brand, Robbie Phoenixx, is one love, one music, our world. And I live by it, literally. So whether you're in a company
Yep.
and you're having to write the same sheet of music because you have a strategic plan that ties to an execution path that's usually sequential, quarterly focus and execution, let's go from the same sheet of music, but let's let that creativity really flow. It's an authentic thing that's a differentiator you don't even know is under your lid sometimes. And I promise you, I've been in those meetings because I used to deliver intelligence briefings every 2 weeks in senior leadership functions from the chief marketing officer, chief executive officer on down. And I would be in those meetings where it was standing room only because they know here comes Robbie. He's got a different spin on how to compete to win. And
Hmm.
I promise you, this is really worth your while. I promise you, it will prove out on your top line revenue growth and it will scale to help even over time your execution, your OPEX, and your EBITDA. And that's my word. And thank you for having me again.
Well, thank you for being on the program and have a great night. I mean, we're in New Hampshire, so it's like evening time, but we'll definitely have this out to the rest of the world through Spotify for podcasters. It's going to be all the major platforms. We're going to give you a landing page for your audience, and they'll be able to get to it however they want. So
Awesome.
thank you very
Sounds
much
great.
for being on the program. Okay, have a great night.
Take care.